How you going? Pretty good. Anyone remember what our theme is for this term? Identity. Yeah, our new identity. Talking about who it is we are. Like, that's one of the fundamental questions of life. Who am I? What am I here for? What am I meant to do with this life that I've got? Who am I? And until we figure that out, nothing else makes sense. So that's what we're focusing on, our identity. So a couple of weeks ago, we talked about this, that you are dependent. You are dependent. Whether you realize it or not, you've been made as this creature who is dependent. We're dependent on God for every single breath. And hopefully you're getting more of that sense that every breath is a gift. Every day is a gift. Every moment has been given to you for a reason. You are dependent. And then last week, Justin talked to us about you are vulnerable. And this is the crazy thing. As dependent as we are on God the Creator, we ignore Him over and over again. And if we don't live every moment thankful for Him, then that's an offense to God. If we just imagine that He doesn't exist for a moment, well, that's an offense to God. And that puts us in a really vulnerable position before this powerful God who holds every breath, and we're just ignoring Him. Do you get that? We're vulnerable. You're dependent, you're vulnerable. But what I want to talk to you about tonight is awesome. With those two things, you are dependent, you are vulnerable. Also, you are loved. You are loved. If it was just those two things, life would be really scary. But this third one makes all the difference. You are loved. I want to tell you this story. I've been reading this book over the last few weeks. It's called Working Class Boy. It's by a guy called Jimmy Barnes. Anyone heard of Jimmy Barnes? Yeah? Cool. Anyone know who Jimmy Barnes is? Yes?
He's a musician.
Musician, yes, rock star. He was in a band called Cold Chisel in the 70s and 80s. Your parents might be into him. Anyway, if we can get a picture there of Jimmy Barnes. This is a book about him when he grew up. He grew up in Elizabeth and Port Adelaide and Wingfield and Tea Tree Gully. Like, that's where he spent his childhood. He actually moved over to Australia from Scotland when he was about 5 years old, with his parents. They were in a really rough spot in Scotland. And they decided to come to Australia for this new life, and everything was going to be awesome. But the problem was they brought their problems with them because Jimmy's parents were messed up. They didn't know how to love each other, and they were just so focused on their own problems that Jimmy's parents spent all their time trying to forget their problems. Jimmy's dad was an alcoholic. Jimmy's mum was an alcoholic. And it put them in a really rough position, living out in Elizabeth back in the in the 60s. And that was just when Elizabeth got started. And he was working in a factory, Jimmy's dad, and not getting much money. And whenever payday came around on Thursday, he would go straight to the pub and he'd drink his whole paycheck. And he'd come home and the kids would have no food. Like, no food because their dad had drunk away all the money. And their dad would come home totally smashed. And he would say, "I love you, Jimmy, I love you." And it just meant nothing to him. Because he knew those words were hollow. Because he was this poor, starving kid. And his brothers and sisters were poor and starving. And it got him really desperate. Because his parents were totally absent. They weren't there to love him. And so he was just hanging out with his friends in the street until late at night. He stopped going to school. He started stealing, and he actually started drinking as well while he was still in primary school. Just this messed up situation. This guy had no feeling of love in his life. And his parents eventually split up because they were just so volatile together. And his mum met this new guy called Reg. And she got married to Reg, and then they took the kids from Elizabeth and they moved into this new house down at Wingfield, which, has anyone ever been to Wingfield? Anyone live in Wingfield? That's a rough place to live. Like, They were still really poor. But Jimmy came into this house with his mum and his new stepdad, Reg. And one of the things that blew him away was on the very first night in that new house, Reg said, "Jimmy, come with me. I want to show you one of my favorite things." And they go into the kitchen, they sit down at the table there, at the dining table, and he pulls out 2 bowls and he pours Wheaties into the bowls and then milk, and he slides one of the bowls to Jimmy and he says, "Let's eat." And it's like 8 o'clock at night. He's like, "I like to do this. I like to eat cereal." And Jimmy is just blown away because he's been living in a house for years that has no food or anything. And there is food in the fridge and there's food in the pantry. And though they're poor, they've somehow got food. And here's this guy, Reg, being the dad he never had, just sitting across from him and eating cereal, just hanging out with him. And it blew his mind. And what really blew his mind was Reg wasn't a rich man, but all the money he had, he would bring home to feed the family. And it started to change things for Jimmy. And then he said there was this one moment that really stuck with him. It was this. So living out at Wingfield in this really old house, and they didn't have proper plumbing and sewage and everything. They had like a septic tank out in the backyard. And something went wrong with the septic tank, like it's like a hole in the ground where all the sewage goes. And it was meant to be cleared out, but it had got jammed up. And so normally you'd have people come in and pump it out for you, like professionals. But they were so broke that they couldn't afford that. And he walks out into the backyard and he sees Reg in the sewage pit, just in all of their sewage with a shovel. And he's digging out the sewage, trying to clear it out for him. And Jimmy's just hit by the smell of it. Like, just imagine that, how disgusting that would be. And he says, "Reg, what are you doing? Why are you doing this?" And Reg is in the pit. And he puts his shovel down and he looks up. And Jimmy said he's got tears in his eyes. And he said, "I'm doing this because I love you, son. Because I love you, son." He was in the pit for him. Just imagine that. Someone coming down, taking on all your muck, taking it off you onto them because they love you so much. You get that picture? That is the picture of what Jesus has done. See, like I said before, every person's problem, apart from God, is that we ignore him in just the smallest things. And it's such an offense. It's sin and it sticks to us like sewage. And it's this big problem that just has us trapped. And we're covered in it. And we're facing judgment for all the horrible things we've done. And then God loved us so much. He sent his son Jesus into the world, who loved the world so much that he got down into that sewage pit of our sin. It says he took our sins on himself so that we could be clean. And he did it. He died so that we might come to God. So God was so desperate for a relationship with you, he sent Jesus to clean you up so that you could have that free relationship with God. That's how much he loves you. Let me read this to you. This is 1 John 4, verse 10. "In this is love. Not that we've loved God, but that he loved us and sent his son to be the payment for our sins." This is love. Not that we loved him, but that he loved us and sent his son to be a payment for us. Because we are flat, broke, and hopeless on our own and just covered in the muck of sin. And he loved us so much to come down. And just be in it. Jesus took on all our shame, all that horrible stuff. And he looks you in the eyes and he says, "It's because I love you, son. It's because I love you, daughter." How amazing is that? But here's the thing. You are loved. You are loved like you can't even comprehend. I've been praying today that you guys will get this, the magnitude of it. Reg and Jimmy, that was an amazing picture of love. But it's got nothing on Jesus' love for you, because that is personal for you and it's desperately what you need. But it means nothing unless you respond to it. Jesus, he was speaking to his disciples at one time and he said that he was the shepherd and he loved his sheep, his people. And he said, I lay down my life for the sheep. That's how much he loves them. But he says this, my sheep hear my voice and they know my voice and they follow me. He's talking about a relationship that the shepherd has with the sheep. Like it's not just a one-way thing. Love is about a relationship. It's about a response. It's about restoring something that was broken. It's like this. I love people. I try and love everyone. And I want the best for people and hope the best for people because I love people. But that's got nothing on the love I have for my wife. What's the difference? The difference is we have this commitment to each other that is exclusive, that we've made these promises to love each other till death parts us, no matter what. I can love other people and care for other people, but it's nothing on that commitment. Do you get that? That love means nothing until you make a response. See, Jimmy had this older brother called John Swan. Jimmy Swan and John Swan, that was their first surname. John, he didn't get Reg. He didn't trust Reg. He was wary of Reg. And even though Reg was so loving to John rejected him and walked away. And he missed out on all that care and support and love because he didn't accept it. He didn't respond to that love. And Jimmy, on the other hand, he was like, I am in. This is the most amazing thing ever, and I'm going to take it on board. And Jimmy actually changed his last name from Swan to Barnes because he loved Reg Barnes so much. Do you get that? So this is it. We are dependent creatures. We know it. Like, there's no way we can exist on our own. But we're vulnerable creatures, and we know that we have done stuff, and we are imperfect. And if we're ever going to have a relationship with a perfect God, there's stuff that we've done that just needs to be forgotten and cleared away somehow. But we are so loved, so loved. Jesus humbled himself to become a servant, taking on our sin and dying with it in order to bring us to God because he loves us. And now you need to respond. So what are you going to do? You can ignore it and just let it pass you by. But that just leaves you vulnerable and dependent and in a really bad place. Or you can just get that picture of how much he loves you and let that redefine you. Let that become your identity. Let that rewrite your whole story. That I'm defined by him now. I'm going to take on his name. And let that love move you to commit to him completely. To let him define who you are. To let your identity be bound up in how much he loves you. Because he loves you so much. Get this, in Ephesians chapter 3, we can get it on the screen here. Paul is writing about his prayer that he has for the Christians in Ephesus. And he says this, I'm praying that you might have power to comprehend, to understand with all the saints, with all the Christians, what is the breadth and length and height and depth. And you see that? To know the love of Christ, which surpasses knowledge, that you may be filled with the fullness of God. He's saying, if only you get this, If only you get this changes everything. If you could understand how wide, how deep, how long, how high Jesus' love is for you, it's going to change everything for you. So this is what I want us to do. I want to challenge you to respond to that love. Do I want us to shut our eyes for a moment and just focus? I want you to get that picture. Jimmy looking at Reg in the sewage pit, digging out all his muck because he loves him. And now I want you to get this image in your head. Jesus on the cross dying for you because he loves you. And he knew there was no other way. And that you were so broke you couldn't pay the price for your sin on your own. And he's crying because he loves you. And he's calling you to respond. And you might never have responded to his love before. But God is calling you now to respond to him.